Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning. One of the things we wanted to discuss today is about brands and how brands will be as we come out of this marketplace. As you have seen, we're recording this session to then circulate it out so we build a wider discussion. We've got three great speakers to try and engage you today, or to engage you today. Shane from City Pantry is going to talk about branding from his perspective and open the session. And then I'm going to introduce Paula, who you would have met previously, who used to look after all the F&B at Bicester Village and used to be the managing director of Betty's, the famous Betty's up in Yorkshire. And then Lindsay, who has been an independent marketing consultant across a number of interesting businesses. And all going to talk about their perspective of brands. And then we're going to open up to a general discussion on your thoughts. Because as we come out, what I'm finding in terms of feedback is the key thing is what's going to build trust back with the consumer. Is it going to be the brand? Or is it going to be service? Or is it going to be something local and boutique? There's all kinds of discussions about how do we actually start re-engaging in a business front, and what is actually going to be the factors that actually do get brands or do get the consumer trusting what they're buying. So this should be a fascinating discussion. I welcome you all. Shane, can I pass over to you to open up?
Certainly. Morning, everyone. So as Chris said, my name's Shane. I'm the marketing director at City Pantry, just to give you a bit of background on myself. I've been in the role for about 6 months, but beyond that, I've always been across B2B businesses, both from a brand and performance marketing point of view. I believe my colleague Sarah is on the call as well. She's going to share a few slides that I put together to kick off the conversation. So I'll just wait for her to get those up. Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, Lauren. It seems like you've disabled screen sharing for participants.
Disabled it. Did we fix it?
Yeah, it says disabled attendee screen sharing.
Got it. There you go.
Thank you.
Marvelous.
There you go.
How does that look?
Yeah, I think we can, well, I can see it. Can everyone else see that?
Yep, all good.
Yeah.
Okay, marvelous. So obviously Chris started off the discussion by giving us the overall question is how impactful will brands be in the new world? What will they actually look like once we come out of this, or we move into what the new world is going to look like? So I wanted to put together a few thoughts on what that might actually entail. And so we'll just go through that quite quickly. As I said, hopefully it won't be too much longer than 10 minutes. If you could go on, please, Sarah. It's a strange time. I was originally looking at various different pictures that might encapsulate what 2020 looks like, and they were all really depressing. So I opted instead for a cute puppy running through a field, because we all know it's weird. We all know it's strange. There's no point in me regurgitating or trying to encapsulate what is happening right now. But it can't be understated, whether you're a brand, a business, or even, you know, an individual person. We're in a weird time. Things are different, and things are going to stay different for a while, and there was no way of encapsulating that in any other way. So I thought we'd kick off with a nice little puppy, and then we'll get into the actual content. Sarah, please, next slide. So I'll share around these, or Chris will be able to share around these slides afterwards, because there's a couple of videos here that I wanted to share for you to view afterwards. But it effectively, what we're looking at is kind of a bit of a brand backlash, in that people don't want platitudes with their marketing. They don't want brands sort of telling them we're all in this together, even though that message is needed. They don't want to be told it in an inauthentic way. They don't want to be told it in a way that is clearly selling to them. It's like, you know, opening up with orchestral music and then telling them we're all together, and then finally asking them to buy something. People are seeing through it very, very quickly and easily. And that they don't necessarily want to see that at the moment. So platitudes are not what people are going to be looking for when they're looking to resonate with brands. So it's incredibly important to rather than feeling like you need to say something, it's when you say something and what you say needs to be related to you as a brand. If you're, you know, there's the backlash at the moment of people jumping on the bandwagon to say something about community and us all being together. And from a buyer perspective, from a consumer perspective, they can see through that if it's not authentic and if it's not, you know, a truly engaging message. I think Relevancy from a brand perspective comes from the value you provide as a brand, and you can't lose sight of that. Next slide, please, Sarah. So I always go back to a TED Talk that I first saw about 5 years ago now, by a speaker called Simon Sinek. I'm sure some of you may have come across it before. And he basically writes, there's a book he's written about called Start With Why. And it's all about how brands can engage and think about their messaging and think about how they speak about things. And it really comes back to linking back to why you exist as a brand or a business in the first place. And in uncertain times, it's a really great way of galvanizing and unifying yourself as a business in terms of why you actually do what you do, and starting with that message. Because what people have found, and what businesses have found, is that people buy why you do something, they don't necessarily buy what you do. However, right now, what you do is as valuable as it's ever been. So previously, I would be extolling the value of starting with why and really focusing on that. What right now is incredibly important, because people are already engaged with brands. What they're looking for is service. They're looking for what they need right now. People are craving consistency, they're craving comfort, and they're craving, you know, the old way that they used to know, and they want it back. And so if you're a brand that served them previously, you're a brand that can serve them now, as long as you do it through that message, that North Star, that why you do what you do. And as I said, a lot of businesses out there can tell you what they do. Only a handful can really tell you why they do it. And reconnecting with that why is really important at where we are now in terms of the situation of 2020. Sarah? What I wanted to do was give you an example of what we did this at City Pantry, to show you that how it works in terms of running through the exercise. We'd realized as a business at the start of this year that we'd actually drifted away from our why. So we'd moved away from why we exist as a business. We'd moved into more of the how, and that can happen quite often with businesses that are of a certain age. City Pantry is about 4 years old now, so we've become much more commercial than the standard startup, and we've moved away from why we existed. And very quickly, at the beginning of Q1, we decided to sit back down and reconnect with that why, and we came up with that actually making people's working lives better. That's our why. That's why City Pantry exists. And what you'll notice at the moment is we're not talking about what we do as a business. We're not talking about food. We are just here because the reason the business was started was to make people's working lives better. So we reconnected with that why, and how we do it through innovative and agile tech solutions. Again, you'll notice we're not talking at this point about the food we deliver or the mechanisms. It's just the how we deliver the working life improvement. And then finally, the what we do, we can order and deliver the best food to wherever your employees are working. And we realized that by taking this approach, it made the pivot we had to do, you know, because as a business, we serviced offices. You know, 90% of offices closed. That was going to have an impact on business. We've managed to pivot, but we've done it in an authentic way by making sure that we're always going back to why we exist in the first place, and that's making people's working lives better. And I think the key point there was that by going through that exercise at the start of the year, it set us up to be more resilient for where we are now. So I think as brands, if we can go through, if in any individual brand, if they can go through that exercise, that realigning with their why, then I think it makes all the messaging you do on the back of that more authentic and actually speaks to the people that are already engaging with your brand. Sarah, if you could move on. So coming back to the original question, how impactful will brands be? So I think the first thing is if your brand was impactful pre-COVID, it still is. That won't have changed. The key point is that you shouldn't waste that opportunity with, as I mentioned at the beginning, jumping on bandwagons or trying to say something that maybe doesn't fit with your brand pre-COVID, just because you feel like you should be saying something. If you're a brand that's impactful and it's a brand that you've driven value to your clients before, they will come back and they will still engage with you because the why your brand exists hasn't changed. If it wasn't as impactful as you'd want it to be, or it isn't as impactful as you'd like, now's a great time to change that. With one of the things that the situation has done is kind of given a bit of space and freedom for people to think about how their brand looks, how their business looks. And it's a good opportunity to go through that why exercise and go back and understand why your brand does what it does, re-articulate that, and take that back out to the people that were already engaging with your brand. And then finally, I think brands will always have a place, because those that have an impact and those that can speak with authenticity, people will naturally gravitate to. As I said, there are connections we form with brands, and some of these are the bigger and more impactful brands, and some of these are the very smaller local brands. People naturally form relationships with these brands, and if you can speak in an authentic way that speaks to a certain audience, and that audience will be the people that understand and buy into your why, they're the people that will always come back to you as a brand. And that, to summarize, is, as I said, it's very short, very top line, but I think it was a good place to kick us off. So back
That's great. Oh, that's great, Shane. Thanks very much indeed. Well done on that. Thank you. Paula, can I bring you in at this point?
Yes, hi, thanks, Chris. Just to sort of introduce myself. So as Chris says, my background, predominantly Betty's and Taylor's of Harrogate there for many years, and then more recently Bicester Village. So I'm coming at it, I suppose, really as somebody who has either been in a brand or partnered with lots of brands, and I suppose what I've observed in terms of what's been happening as sort of COVID-19 has played out. So working with the question that Chris posed around what will the consumer perception be of brands, I suppose, and branding, and will brands have to change as they come out? I suppose for me, the key thing is that there's been a huge amount of positivity, I think. So I think that there is still trust there with quite a lot of brands in terms of how they have positioned themselves, really, I suppose in the early part of COVID, sort of working and navigating through something that's been really uncertain. And I think on the whole, most people have put people, customers first, and I think that has engaged with people. And also the fact that they've managed to be quite innovative in terms of how they've pivoted their models to, as Shane said, bring the experiences how people want them. So obviously people can't go and engage with the brand in the way that they have done previously, but being able to have experiences at home, I think, has kept that connection. And I think that's been really important and will obviously play a part as we move forward, I suppose, into what unravels in the next phase. For me, the couple of things that I think are really emerging from this are, one is, I think, as Shane said, I think a lot of people are using this time to really reevaluate their brands. I think even those that were very good at it, I think it has provided opportunity, I suppose, to go back to your sort of core competencies. You know, what is our core purpose? What's our reason for being? And a lot about the sort of purpose beyond profit, and you know why they're doing things and how they're sort of going through this journey, making sure they're doing it for the right reasons. And I think those brands that have managed to do that in a really authentic way, again, will be the ones that are sort of continuing with that, to build that trust with their consumers, and I suppose the consumers will be more ready to engage with them at the end of it. For me, the other, I suppose, important parts in terms of what will be new and more important, one of the things that I think I'm really pleased to see come out of this is, I think, sustainability. I think the volume has really increased on sustainability, and I suppose a desire for seeing much more sustainable, ethical business models. And I think that actually a lot of brands have are looking at that and seeing how do they come out of this, not back to sort of the new normal, but almost how do they come out of this better, and sort of playing a better part in that in terms of how they do business. Local, I think, has been huge in terms of, you know, because of maybe necessity, but lots of local producers engaging much more directly with consumers. And although local was always very key previously in terms of provenance and ingredients, I think that will again be quite important as we sort of come out of this. Quality, people looking for that quality. And I hope there'll be a new sort of perception of the value of that as well from a consumer perspective, which will be really great. And I think, I suppose the need to build trust as we move into the next phase, I think will just be about how people communicate the experience and how they take their consumers with them on the journey. Because one of the things, again, that will be important will be just confidence in the safety. So, you know, there's obviously lots of unknowns around, you know, what will social distancing be, what will be required in terms of experience. I am an optimist, so I think that there is a real desire for people to re-engage and want experience. I think not having had it has in some ways almost created a new value for it. And so how people then recreate that experience for guests in a way that makes them feel safe and that they can engage with it. So how do you create a safe environment that allows that social interaction again, I think again will be quite key. So I think brands that are able to really engage and communicate, and sometimes I think in those instances over communicating is quite important. So, you know, keep saying it and then people will trust it and and feel confident to sort of engage with it. But absolutely, I think very similar sentiments to Shane. Really, I'm very confident that, you know, there's a lot of brands out there that have, I think, used their values as their guiding principles. And I think, again, those ones, you can see that. I think as a consumer, it's very transparent. So again, those will, I think, be the ones that come out of this a lot stronger. But I'm you know, also very confident that having an experience, wanting to go out and engage more, is definitely, there's a demand. And I think that trust will, you know, be there and sort of be built, you know, will build up even stronger, I think, coming out of this. So, yeah.
That's great, Paula. That's lovely. Thanks very much indeed. It's always hard to present to such a group, so well done. Lindsay, can I bring you at this point?
Sure, Chris, and thank you for the invite to the forum.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
I was speaking to my boss the other day. He's an ex-hotelier. He's a big deal hotelier in the luxury industry. And he was speaking on a panel of luxury hoteliers. And he said, and I quote this verbatim, "If you've not been speaking to your guests by now, you're fucked." And I thought to myself, okay, that's harsh. And then I thought, okay, I'm gonna break that down, because that's actually quite difficult for brands to do. So firstly, like the others have said, we need to be speaking to brands in a way that's authentic. And now, we need to be speaking to customers in a way that's authentic. And I think now more than ever, our customers are really looking to us for answers, for guidance, for support. These are difficult times, and actually we trust the brands and we're looking for them to show up at these points. So I really do honestly believe that brands can deliver that authenticity. Secondly, I honestly think this is the most important thing, but what your brand is saying has to be authentically the position that the guest is receiving. So what you say absolutely has to match the experience that the guest is getting. There is no industry that needs to learn that more than airlines. I think we all know that. British Airways, to fly, to serve. I don't think so. Hospitality, the guest is always right. I'm not convinced that's been entirely true either. I, for one, am kind of sick of working for companies that talk the good talk, that say our guests mean everything to us and our staff mean the world to us. And then actually you walk into the office in the morning and it's a toxic environment and people don't even lift their head to say hello, you know? If we're saying as a brand, I'm customer centric and I believe in you and we're good and this is what we do, then we have to absolutely intrinsically live that as well. Thirdly, I honestly believe that brands are intrinsic to us as humans. What we wear, what we shop, who we support, where we dine, that's all a reflection of us and of what we love as individuals. You know, that Ferrari cap that you wear or the Lululemon fitness classes, you know, we really trust our brands. And I think as brands, we have to understand that people put their trust in us and we have to respect that. And I guess my big tip for that is, as a brand or as a business, I think we have to now go back to a point whereby we're thinking again like the startup that we once were. And if you're not the startup, if you weren't the original founder, then you need to go back to those founding principles. And I'm pretty certain those founding principles weren't revenue, bums on seats, year-on-year growth. I'm pretty certain that founding principle was something like, I want to create a Cheers bar in my local area. It wasn't, I want to create 8% year-on-year growth. So now more than ever, we have to go back to that. What did we initially want to achieve as a business? And how authentically are we delivering that to our customers now? So yes, I think brands are going to be incredibly important in the future, but I honestly believe we have to A, live our values, and B, authentically communicate those values too. And if we do that, and the brands that get that right, I think they'll be the brands that will really come out of this.
Thank you, Lindsay. That's great. Certainly thought-provoking. There's a number of points which come out, I think, from all three of you. Number one, which I think is the most exciting piece, is that people need to go back to founding principles and actually really rediscover their businesses again. Because actually one of the things I've noticed during this period, and I'll be open to see what you think, is you can tell the difference between those companies that do care and generally want to give a service, and those who are quite arrogant in their process. And the ones who are arrogant, actually, you get very frustrated with very quickly. And actually, you can see that actually once this is over, they'll lose business quite quickly. So it does occur to me that service is going to be one of the real differentials as we come out of this in a big way. Andrew White, can I bring you in at this point? Because obviously you do PR. You're working with a number of major brands. You need to turn your mic on first.
There you go.
Hi. Your thoughts?
I thought it was really interesting, fascinating. And the one thing that I remember when we went into this situation was a few hotels and a few hotels and how they dealt with their people. And there were some things that went around about I've been laid off, and there was this backlash of hotels and how they were dealing with their people. And I just think it's one thing that we haven't really talked about, is talk lots about experience and values and service levels. But a lot of people are or a lot of organizations talk about how they value their people, how they value the welfare of their employees, et cetera, and just about now, something major, very major is about to happen with furlough and how we deal with everybody. And I just wondered, or just like to put it out to the guys that just spoke, there is a potential for backlash, and just what their thoughts were and how to deal with it.
Who would like to answer that one?
No one, probably.
Michael.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Andrew, and thank you to our three presenters. Great thought lines there, and I've got so many thoughts about this. Andrew, though, has brought it right back to the people, which is, to me, it's all about the leadership of that individual company, brand, organization, as to how that brand will deal with this. I've heard some awful stories about major brands who've really not looked after their people. And in fact, I think they've been quite brutal about it. And on the other side, and hopefully more of those leaders who've really looked after the people. I heard somebody I spoke to last week said, I got a call from my general manager apologizing that she didn't call yesterday to wish me a happy birthday. And I thought, how amazing is that? That leader deserves to have the very best team and the very best clients who will come back, because that team will create the atmosphere and create the spirit and the soul. As Shane was saying, the why, the soul of why we're there. And I really believe that how hotels and companies let their people go, as unfortunately when furlough finishes, sadly they will have to, and we have to face that and try and support those people. How they let them go will depend how they will hopefully be able to welcome them back, and that those people will want to come back. to them. And I think there's my former company was Hyatt, and I still, although I've retired from Hyatt, I still remember so well the mission, the why for Hyatt was that we care for people so they can be their best. That was our whole mission. There were no fancy words. And the people were everybody. They were the guests, they were the customers, they were the owners, they were the suppliers, they were anybody that we came into contact with. And through our leadership, that percolated through, through all our hotels and companies. So I think it's so true that it's all about the people. And if we can keep our people engaged and enthused and have the energy to come back into the hotels to welcome guests under what will be very, very different and difficult circumstances, then those brands will receive the trust and confidence of the customers to support them.
Thank you, Michael. Jill, shall I bring you in this point? Is this about people leadership, as Michael was talking about?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chris. Fascinating conversation. I think the link between brand engagement and employee engagement is really clear. And it's incredibly important that the two are aligned and that there is complete congruence between the two. It was interesting, Shane, that you started with Simon Sinek's Why, because I don't know if you've read his new book, The Infinite Game, which is all about exactly what we're talking about. He talks about the difference between the finite game and the infinite game. Finite being a bit like chess or football, players are known, the rules are fixed, the endpoint is clear, the winners and losers are clearly identified. The difference in the infinite game is that players come and go, rules are changeable, and there's no defined endpoint. And he makes a real, he talks about the why in the context of a just cause. And I thought I'd read something out to you because for me, I've been thinking a lot about this in my own business, but it feels hugely relevant to what we're talking about. He describes a just cause as a specific vision of a future state that does not yet exist, a future state so appealing that people are willing to make sacrifices in order to move towards that vision. So the idea is that a just cause is a noble purpose for being, and that our why obviously comes from our past, from our origin story. It's who we are, but our just cause is our why projected into the future. And it strikes me that this is a time for us to do just that. We're so caught up in thinking about what does this mean for us right now, which for me, I see a lot of companies going quite introspective and thinking me, and forgetting that their brand is there in service of others. So really kind of the work that I'm focused on in my practice in leadership development is working with leaders, not just to think about, the practicalities of this current state, of which there are many implications, but also trying to pull them into the future and think, how does your brand serve in the future? What is that compelling state that is possibly very idealistic, and yet it needs to be in order to pull everybody forward into a new state of being? And of course, and I'll mention lots of words that Shane, Paula and Lindsay have already mentioned, but authenticity is absolutely key. You can't have an authentic, compelling brand that says they're one thing if, when a young member of staff goes to a leader asking for careers advice, the career advice is actually more aligned to how the business is going to be in the future, as opposed to caring about that individual and their career. So the nuances of how you make congruent the employer and the consumer-facing brand really needs to be looked at and role modeled by the leaders themselves. And the last thing I'll do is just give a couple of examples. So first of all, at the beginning of lockdown, my Barclaycard commercial stopped working. As it does from time to time. Wasn't sure if it was a fraudulent issue or something. It stopped working. I could not get in touch with Barclaycard commercial, and I've had literally almost zero contact. In fact, it's actually Barclaycard itself who've had to try to sort it out because the business team in India have gone down. Now, after this is all finished, that is a brand that I have completely lost any trust or faith in. I can't imagine what it's like to work for them right now, but they are going to lose my business as a result. And I'm sure there's lots of brands, as has been mentioned, and will go the same way. A few years ago, I was asked to facilitate the Luxury and Wealth Summit in St. Moritz. It was a really tough gig. One of the things that was discussed at that forum is, how do we leave a legacy in luxury when people care so much more about provenance? It's not about labels, it's not about having the name, it's more about really caring about, where does this brand come from, what does it stand for? And it led to a really, really interesting discussion. And I think we need to look at, what do the words trust really mean? Because they don't always mean the same thing to different people. What one person might think of as trust for me is about consistency, or about reliability. It might be that for another person, it is about comfort, or it's about relatability. And so I think all of those words that you have all used today, and we might all use to describe trust, I think really need mining down, both in terms of brand and the relationship with the consumer, but also in terms of how we want to show up as leaders, as people in work. So that's my tuppence worth. Thanks, Chris.
No, thank you, Jill. Hamish, can I bring you in here? Because obviously you're probably in an industry that's most far in line with airlines.
Yeah, you have to pardon the dog in the background. Look, I think there's some really interesting observations that I have, and the authenticity thing springs to mind. But in the airline space, what we're seeing is certainly the Middle Eastern carriers sticking to their message of being high service, high integrity brands in every dealing we have with them. So they're not changing their direction, for the long term. They're not changing their vision. They're sticking with, a high level of service right throughout their global sort of offering. And that's perhaps sort of contrast to other carriers. In Australia, we've got carriers that they're trying to cut their way through this whole process with cost cutting, and that's having a detrimental effect on their brand, because really service has gone out the window. And, if you're talking about 50% cuts on food and beverage budgets, that's a substantial impact. And then I think, I think Lindsay, you mentioned, British Airways, what an absolute disaster they have on their hands from a PR perspective, with how they've handled staff and being seen to be very opportunistic during this time. And I think, whilst we deal a lot with British Airways as a customer, the people that we deal with aren't behaving like that, but obviously senior management have really made a real mess of how they're going to, deal with what is an inevitable staff cut, but to be seen to be doing what they're doing is, going to backfire on them in a big way. But I do think that across the airline industry, there's a lot of work going on to make sure that people are comfortable to get back on planes, and reinforce brand image about safety and, giving passengers comfort that, what is going to be a crowded environment, they're going to be safe. So it's interesting. Yeah.
Thanks, Hamish. Mariana, bringing you in here, because a lot of it's going to be about service, isn't it? That's the nice thing about this coming through. Service ethics is going to come back to the top of the pile, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to who are our ambassadors of the service, and it's our own employees, initially in hospitality and even in the retail. These are the people that really provide and go above and beyond still and yet. And they have been ambassadors of their brands they've been working for through the tough times and a little bit of later. obviously I agree with everything that all the speakers did, and there was my little list that I've also prepared when I thought of what would mean all this for us. But why don't I give a couple of maybe examples? I have a friend who's a salesman for Armani, and he pretty much spread the word to all of his regular customers, I'd say, all of his clients, that Armani, unlike other retail owners or brands, decided to pay them part of the furlough, not only the base salary, which is the low one, but decided to actually account the entire commission, as the salespeople are paid by the commission. Which I started reimagining and imagining of how that would work if that happened in hospitality. When all these ambassadors of the brands, when all these servers and bartenders and management actually received little nudge of that was actually a little bit more than their base pay, and how much further they go through the tough times, communicating what a wonderful company they worked for or will continue to work for once things go back. And I think they are the ones that will keep talking about this for years and years that will follow this crisis, and that will continue to make the brand stronger. It's going to be part of those service conversations. Doesn't matter when the hotels or restaurants will reopen, everyone is going to talk about, so how did you handle the crisis? So what did your hotel do? So were you in touch with your managers? So I believe this is going to be part of the service, and you know, combined with all the safety and hygiene regulations and whatnot, and innovative ways we'll find to make all the processes transparent as possible. And also I think a lot of roles and structures will change tremendously. I had a discussion with the former owner of the restaurant group I worked for in New York just yesterday, based on reading the article that was posted by the wellness and resilience lead manager at Google. The HR titles are simply not going to cut it anymore. He is restructuring the whole department and dividing that people sector to make it more specific. This person takes care of the well-being of the people and has the certain list of processes. And these people will be ambassadors of these behaviors that are coming from top. And I think that goes back also to focus on the brands and service and the communities that will be communicated by certain brands. You know, one of my favorite hotels, hotel brands, the Inhabit Hotels. I'm sure you've heard about it here in London. When you click on the community and the ways they give and the ways they engage everything, and when you walk into their hotel, all their employees communicate this. This is part of their service. They encourage you to know that it's not just your rejuvenation and recovery, it's the same way they are being taken care of. So I think it goes back to elevating that importance of people, but also delivering the same message they would deliver to the guests, to the employees as people, because they're the best ambassadors and they will attract the guests. There's power of social media.
So Mariana, asking, obviously one of the things we are finding is we're getting, and I'm sure you're getting 10 emails a day talking about cleaning, health and safety, and how many hotel groups are making this the core foundation stone of how they want to communicate to their customer, which I understand completely. However, is it really going to be that which is going to tempt the customer back, or is it going to be a service ethic or something that actually makes that person valued? Because I can't help feeling that actually people take cleaning almost as a given. They expect that to be of a first-class standard. So the fact that so many people are making that a sales line actually almost puts someone off.
I think, you know, once we return and the establishment will have to have some sort of cleaning, hygiene processes. This is part of the new safety right now. The safety that used to be to make sure that you don't kick something or you don't slip and fall. Now the safety will be the actual hygiene and cleanliness. So it's really great to know that establishments have specific people in charge of these tasks and additional duties. But at the end of the day, it will be, again, up to that person who is in charge of that guest, and how do they tailor that experience to them. There might be guests that will walk into the restaurant or a hotel and say, you know, I don't really care about this whole virus. I trust my immunity. You can wipe whatever you want to wipe. I'm fine. And there will be guests that will be petrified. That will be that one visit a month that they will give it a go because they really want to get out and they really want to make sure. So yes, I think the people that do provide service, that are the immediate direct contact with the guests, will have to do so much more mind reading, just as it was before, when you have to be that mind reader and realize, what is a person like? What could he like? Is he going to go for this wine? Is he going to choose this, you know, dish? This is not about it. This is about, what do they prefer? How do they feel when they walk in? What is their expectation? And again, being transparent about it. Some people will not even want to talk about it anymore, and they don't care if you wiped it down 7 times, because they just want a break from everything that's been up in the air and part of our lives. But there will be people that will care only about that. And it will come down to service, and that person that is that interaction, that has that huge opportunity to turn that experience around and make it authentic to that specific guest. It's part of the journey, I think.
Yeah, fair. Olga, can I bring you in at this point? And your views on this subject?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think that safety will be, or cleanliness will be, such a kind of selling point. It's kind of, to Marianne's point, I agree that there will be groups of people, it will be hugely important. I do trust that actually hotels already do all those standards and increase the times the surface has been cleaned, wiped, etc. So I don't think it will be actually so important. It will become probably one of those just tick box exercises that we've done some additional cleaning. For me personally, it will be, for example, sustainability is much more bigger issue. And that's what I'm personally sold on. But equally, the values of the company, trust, whether the brand creates that authentic content that I'm buying into. Also, it's a small, I think, industry that it's very difficult to fool customers and consumers. It's pretty much impossible, I think, to fool anyone. We truly know there are so many examples. There is so much information right now coming from left, right, and center. It's very difficult to fool the customer. I also wanted to, in terms of the discussion we have about brands, I think different brands in the hospitality industry carry different values and different appeal. For example, if we talk about international hotel chains like Accor, Hilton, Millennium, it's very different from Rosewood, Hoxton, Noble, Hyatt, for example, has been mentioned here. So, and they appeal to different customers. If it's a corporate traveler who's been traveling up to 10 times per year, being part of the loyalty scheme does make sense. However, we know that corporate market right now, business travel, is going through the massive change right now. So being part of that loyalty scheme actually makes no value or very little value. Therefore, and we will be traveling less in the next couple of years than before. Therefore, you will be really taking it will be more of a luxury again, traveling. Therefore, you will be more mindful of where you're staying. And I don't think even the price will be such a major point. It will be more about experience, the values, and brand does kind of, it has actually big weight here. I think individual boutique hotels done a better job customizing or utilizing social media platforms and working with marketing agencies. The big international chains, although they're trying to catch up, but they're still sort of on the back foot. And I think they have a massive kind of challenge right now that they're facing, because their values kind of already diminished to a certain degree. So they will need to do more work if they want to try to keep engaged with their loyalty customers. In terms of employment engagement, I think we will be all asking companies when going through the interview process, and we will be asked as leaders, what have we done during this period of time? How we helped our employees? And the same, individuals will be, companies will want to know how we spend this time. Did we do any charity work? Did we help anyone? How did we communicate? What did we do? So I think it goes both ways. Thank you.
Gary, your thoughts on this?
Thanks, Chris. It's very interesting, and my mind, just like many others, has perplexed with just how much we have to do as we go forward as an industry. But from the hotel sector, I've heard in the last few weeks, certainly from my Aberdeen contacts, there's a lot of oil companies who are still using hotels because they're still classed as essential workers. And they've actually commissioned hotels, not a range of hotels. So they've booked out a Marriott or booked out a Hilton in its entirety, so they put all their people in one property, mainly so they can demonstrate the well-being and the safety to their employees and the people who they're putting into the hotels. So that's one thing on the corporate side, on the non-corporate side. From the leisure side, I always said to my people, there's a fine line between service and hospitality. And in theory, you can teach people how to serve a pot of tea. Sometimes you can't always teach people how to be hospitable. And hospitality, being what we're in, is about being hospitable to people. And I think that's going to be more and more important, because as some people have said, I think the cleanliness side will be taken as a given. I think we need to prove that we're abiding by all the cleanliness systems. But I think we generally, as an independent hotel restaurant, trying to compete with a brand, as in a corporate brand, has always been challenging. And I know that only too well from Aberdeen. We went from 4,500 bedrooms in the region to 8,300 rooms within 3 years. And those extra 4,000 rooms were all branded hotels. And it made the small independents very challenged to try and compete against these big brands coming into the area. What we did, and certainly what we did, is emphasize our hospitality. The service is a given, the cleanliness is a given, but how can we deliver better? One of the big learning points, and Chris, I might have mentioned this to you before, we visited Raffles in Beijing a number of years ago, had reason to complain, and that resulted in us meeting the global Raffles ambassador, and he managed to turn our complaint round in 15, 20 minutes, and we ended up having a fantastic experience. However, it wasn't about the service, it was about the people recognizing that we had a bad experience and they wanted to make sure we were going to get a much better experience. We actually took that concept, the ambassador concept, and brought it back into our business and employed somebody in a multitude of roles, but her role was, as the chap in Beijing said, she was the lounge lizard. She just went and talked to people and made sure that when they came in, they were spoken to, when they left, they were spoken to, and more so that they had a contact, not just the bar staff, we didn't have a reception area. We felt with 50 rooms, we wanted the guests to come in and feel no barrier. The hosts were there, and the hosts were multi-skilled to service and be hospitable to whoever came through the front door. But the main other thing that we realized was that ambassador service was widely recognized and appreciated. When she went out to do sales calls, she wasn't selling to our clients. She was going to say hello to the clients in their position, in their work. And it was very interesting that she would get more appointments than a sales manager, because when a sales manager going into a client is talking about how do I get more sales off you, her role to go into the client was to talk about their experience and how can we make sure that our job is hospitality, how can we make sure that we are meeting the expectations of their guests and their clients that they're putting in. Ever more so in Aberdeen, when obviously there's so many oil companies up there who do rely, and part of, if you're putting a contract into an oil company, you do need to demonstrate, or I would imagine they will need to demonstrate the COVID changes that they've made, and that will become a given in all these big corporate contracts, that you have to demonstrate what you're doing to deliver COVIDness. But it's that fine line between service and hospitality that I know, certainly from the small independent hotels and restaurants, is the brand difference. And that's the other thing I want to bring up. Most of the small independents probably don't realize that they're a brand, because they're one business, one operator. They probably don't call themselves a brand. But I agree, it's important. I've heard many people over the last 3 or 4 weeks talking about revisiting their core values as opposed to their brand values. So maybe that core value is the same as Shane, you're talking about your brand values, but it's very important. You know, some people on this call that I've been talking to offline have been revisiting their core values as opposed to brand values. So maybe that's a message that we also need to get over, Chris.
I think that's a very good point. Vicky, can I bring you this point? I know this is a subject quite close to your heart.
Absolutely. Just a really interesting point that Mariana made about Armani. I have been receiving emails from Brasserie Zedel in London on an ongoing basis throughout COVID. It was one of the places that I was going to go and celebrate my now completely on hold 50th birthday, but we'll do it again next year, so what the heck. Zedel actually was one of the first companies I saw emailing to explain how furlough was great for staff, but normally a large part of the way that their money is made up is through trunk. And so they actually explained the difficulty. They were paying their staff, but their staff were left short every month. And they asked their customers to buy gift vouchers in lieu of future visits. And the response was so great that the staff were all taken care of for another couple of months. And the managing director wrote to us and told us this and thanked us this and various other communications. And then this week, he sent an email saying, can I ask you your opinion? And he simply asked how we feel about going back and what would make us feel comfortable, which is the thing I've been trying to get my clients to do for weeks. Ask your customers. You've got people out there who can tell you exactly what you need to do. Speak to them. But Mariana, it just made me think about you talking about Armani. I thought this was superb that they explained that hospitality people do service and should be rewarded for it. And in times of COVID, of course, there is no service for them to do. So I thought that was fab. One of my research companies was producing under their own steam every week a survey about how 1,000-odd people in the UK felt about various brands, retail brands. And what was very interesting at the beginning of all of this, it was the brands who helped me quickly and made me feel safe. So, I mean, for example, within the supermarket environment, normally if you're doing any kind of presentation about branding, Aldi and Lidl are right up there because they've done the most amazing things. They've changed the whole supermarket environment in the last sort of 5-6 years. Well, they fell absolutely off the scale in this context because they didn't get there quickly. They didn't make people feel safe. It's all marginalized now. It's all sorting itself out. But in those first few weeks, Sainsbury's shot right back up the list. Tesco's went sideways because they didn't respond well in those first few weeks. And it'll be interesting to know exactly how those brands rearrange themselves and come out of this process during COVID, after COVID. But that immediate response in those first few weeks where those brands were, is this brand making me feel safe? Is it helping me? Is it making my life easier? I think was very, very telling. So you've got the brands who made me feel safe during COVID, who did what I wanted, who made my life easier, just as we were hearing earlier from City Pantry. And then you've also got those brands who've kept their name in the market, even if they weren't operational, by doing something or giving something. And at one extreme, you've got IKEA, who famously put their meatball recipe out there. I mean, it's something, isn't it? Kept them in the market, got them talked about. At the other end, you've got somebody like Brewdog making hand sanitizers. And then you've got the stories of all the different companies who were doing great things for the community, for charity, for the NHS, etc. All very important and good. A colleague of ours, friend of ours, runs the Angel and Crown pub in Richmond. And I don't know whether any of you have seen coverage on this because he's been on the news, local and national. He's been all over LinkedIn on a regular basis because when he had to shut the pub, he noticed that the homeless people in Richmond were just kind of lining up outside, sitting in the doorways. And he had a word with them and said, you know, what's happened? Where you're not normally here, what's going on? And they told him that the hostels had all been closed. And as a result of which, since the beginning of COVID, he's been feeding them. Initially, he was using his own stock until that ran out. And then he did crowdfunding and sort of angel networks and whatnot. And he's feeding 50 or 60 people a day on an ongoing basis. And he didn't start out to do that in order to get his brand in the paper. That's not the way he is. He did it because these people needed help. But of course, what's happened to him is this pub will fly in Richmond the minute that things reopen because it's raised its name. And a final point, and I'm conscious of time, is just to say that one of the pieces of work I've been doing with a number of my clients is they want to attract and retain millennials, the new millennials and Gen Z coming through, and we know that those people are looking for authentic brands, brands that really speak of ethics. And I have to wonder how many companies and brands will come out of COVID with a good COVID legacy. And those who've done well, and done well by their people, and done well by the communities that they're working in, are surely going to thrive going forward because of their COVID legacy. And that's where I would leave it, Chris.
Oh, that's great, Vicky. I'm conscious of time too. This is a debate that could go on for another hour quite easily. Can we just say thank you to our three speakers who have been excellent today? So thank you very much indeed. I'm sure you can't hear that, but all the same. Thank you. It's been a great discussion. We'll put this recording out, publish this recording out, obviously tomorrow as well. We find we're getting a lot of good feedback on the discussions that are taking place. So thank you very much indeed. And I wish you a great day. I'm sure this discussion will continue. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
We look forward to the same time next week, 11 o'clock Friday.
Very good.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks all. Thanks, Chris.
Bye.